The human ingenuity is amazing. When we're backed up against the wall, we figure shit out. That's what we do. But right now, nobody is saying our back's against the wall.
This is going to be fun because we literally just connected on the video chat and we're doing a live catch-up, like a friend type catch-up. And I happened to watch one of your films, 8 Billion Angels, just this morning. And it was a cool documentary, which I want to dig into. But I first just want to sort of catch up. Tell me about your life for the last, 5 years.
Yeah, 100%. By the way, thanks for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it. This is going to be fun. I was in Boston when I met you. I was doing production and commercials and in that documentary world. And then 8 Billion Angels obviously happened a couple years ago, which was the big documentary about climate change. Traveled around the world, India, Japan, had a great old time doing that. And then I landed in Los Angeles. So now I started doing a lot of commercials and kind of productions out here. But recently I've actually shifted really heavily into Web3, into the Metaverse, into NFTs and crypto, and kind of bridging everything that I learned in the traditional world and moving it now into this new landscape, which I'm really, really excited about. Interestingly enough, it also connects back to my film 8 Billion Angels about the climate and stuff. So it's like everything's coming full circle. It's been exciting.
So I'm going to want to know what you mean by that when we get there. But all right. So the Metaverse, Web3, we have a lot to talk about. I'm by no means an expert, but it's something I'm super interested and passionate about. Basically, the idea of decentralization and giving the power back to the people. So maybe let's first just talk about 8 Billion Angels, and then we'll get into the Web3 stuff. So how I'm going to attempt to describe the thesis of the film, and then you tell me if I've butchered it. Okay?
Great.
To me, it seemed like you guys were saying that population growth is basically outpacing our ability to best use natural resources, and the consequences is maybe a wide variety of negative impacts on the environment and indeed our quality of life as humans.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that's kind of the core nugget that we were getting to in terms of the kind of the problem we were trying to outline. To give a little bit more detail. So obviously, when you talk about climate change, they think about global warming. They think about the atmosphere getting warmer, and that's definitely an aspect. But there's so many other things that are happening. Aquifers drying up, fisheries collapsing, and all these different things that aren't directly related to necessarily the buzzword of climate change, but they're very much a part of the climate catastrophe that we're talking about. And so what kind of the thesis of the film is that consumption is a big problem, but also we can't really stop it morally, because the U.S. and all of these first world countries have been consuming like crazy for the past 100 years. And now we're sitting here like, oh, the environment's collapsing, guys. No more consuming. And so we're basically closing the door on all of these third world countries and second world countries that have every right to be able to innovate and to be able to better their lifestyle and start consuming more. So with that in mind, you can't morally stop consumption for a very long time, and it's going to go up exponentially for a very long time. So if that is the problem and we can't really step in to solve that, then the next thing we got to look at is population, and that's relationship with consumption. And obviously it's a scary topic, because population, when you talk about population growth or control, everyone's like, don't talk about it, we can't talk about that, it's coercive, and there's all these negative things about it. So we wanted to kind of dive in and talk about those. And really what we found with the data, which is actually kind of insane, is that population grows very quickly, but then it naturally stops and kind of stabilizes once you get equal rights for men and women, and once you have healthcare for every citizen. Just because once that happens, the lifestyle shift in the culture will lead to a naturally stabilizing population. You're seeing it in Japan. You're actually seeing it in the U.S. this year, finally. So our whole kind of idea is like, well, if we can't stop consumption and population is going to keep growing and that's going to add more weight, how do we stabilize population? Turns out feminism and healthcare. It's like giving everyone equal rights will naturally kind of progress to that level. So that's kind of the idea.
So that's super interesting. So are you saying that in the U.S. now we've been on an increase and now we are stabilizing?
So we're approaching. It's kind of like a bell curve. So and if you talk to a lot of economists, they're actually really concerned about it, because our entire economy is built on infinite growth in a finite system. So if you don't have more people consuming more, spending more money, adding more momentum to the economy, then the economy is going to slow down. The issue is, if you keep adding people and you keep doing it, then the economy is going to explode and reach a bubble and pop. So right now it's like we're actually at a crossroads, because we're getting to a point where we're seeing the stabilization in these first world countries like the US, like Japan, and we have to make a decision whether we're going to be okay with it and we're going to continue to try and stabilize these things and work on a sustainable thing, or we're going to start reversing it because we're so scared of an economic decline, and we're so scared to change our economic system that we're actually willing to just expand the bubble until it bursts on a global scale. So right now is a key.
That's super interesting to me, because like it almost maybe opens the door for more conversation about economics in general, because like I am a fan of studying Keynesian economics versus Austrian economics. And Austrian economics is the growth, the economic growth is more of a function of saving and allocating of capital, and the Keynesian is more like spending, right? Consuming and spending. So that makes me wonder if there isn't more exploration to be done there, like as we reach as population as we start to see economic slowdown, is it more related to, do we have a bigger impact on it with population or with more conservative thinking? Like maybe we need to conserve more, maybe we need to spend less, maybe we need to allocate capital differently and actually allow creative destruction, as Schumpeter called it. But I don't have the answers. It's just an interesting exploration. So I want to congratulate you on the film. It's not an easy thing to do, to complete a film. Tell me how you came into the film.
Yeah, 100%. So one of my good friends, Katya Alexander, she was my co-producer on the movie. She was approached by someone she knew down in Philadelphia. He was, a real estate mogul, had kind of, played his game in there and had a decent amount of money that he wanted to now move and invest into a film, because he was really passionate about the environment. And he really wanted to kind of jumpstart his next career as an activist, as one of these people. So he approached Katya and asked if she had the chops to be able to pull off a film like this, and she was like, absolutely. And then she approached me right afterward and was like, hey, let's partner up, let's make this film happen, it's going to be amazing. And then so we partnered up, we built out the whole budget, we did, planned everything, pre-production, got the budget from this real estate guy. His name is Terry Spar, he's a great guy. And yeah, it in a weird way, it almost kind of fell into our laps, but we had been doing so much preparation in terms of how to create really streamlined productions, how to make sure everyone's happy, how to please a client, that we were ready. So it's it's one of those things that, like, success is luck meets preparation. So we got real lucky that this opportunity landed, but we were ready enough to be able to execute on it and do what we needed to do. So yeah, it's kind of like the universe just threw it at us.
That's great. So you were one of the producers. What were your more hands-on approach? Were you in organizing and finding who the talent would be in terms of who's on screen, or like where did you land in the producer mix? Yeah, so we
split all of the producer roles pretty equally. So we started with just a massive folder of data from Terry Spar, from our executive producer, and he goes, "This is what I figured out. This is what I found. Make a movie about it." And we were like, okay. So we read through the whole thing, figured out the different areas we wanted to touch on. One of my friends, Victor Vell, we hired him as the director, and so he kind of started helping structure the narrative in a way. And yeah, we spent a year just building out all of the people we wanted to do, all of the places we wanted to visit. We reached out to them, confirmed them all, and then we did 4 different trips. We went to Japan for 10 days. We went to India for 10 days. Did a 21-day road trip across the U.S. to talk to all of the farmers in the Midwest. Not all of them, obviously, but major ones. And then we were up in Maine, in Acadia National Park, because interestingly enough, oyster farming is actually unbelievably good for the ocean. So it sucks up excess nitrogen and oxygenates the water. So, because the whole point, we wanted to find, most environmental films, they're like, oh, everything sucks, the world's ending, go home. And we're like, no, this isn't the vibe that we want. There's, I think it was Errol Morris has a really good list of documentary tips, because he was an amazing documentarian. And one of them was, you have to assume people are going to want to go home after your movie and have sex because they're on a date. So if you kill the mood, If you ruin it for everybody, your movie's not going to do well. You have to have that kind of ending positive note. So we took that really to heart, and we wanted to really make it solution-based. So when we're talking to the oyster farmer about how the oceans around Maine are acidifying and lobsters are dying off, we then flip that and show how he's making money and building a livelihood off reversing this process through oyster farming. So it's like, instead of trying to say doom and gloom, let's pray to God that we can all survive this. It's like doom and gloom, but strategy, solution, and look, here's how it's working.
I thought you did a great job with the structure that way. It was good pace. I really liked your use of characters. Everybody was very authentic. I felt that particular oyster farmer that you're mentioning, I felt his emotion come through. It was very important, that I connected sort of semi-early in the film. And, I was paying close attention because obviously I'm about to do this interview, but I also wanted to just see how engaged I would be in the content and the characters in the film, and I definitely was sucked in. So great job there. I thought your structure was great, sort of, raising the stakes. The deli segment was very compelling. Very compelling. That was like, obviously, I'm going to recommend that people go see the film. It's a really good. I say go see the film. Go on Amazon and see the film, because it really is thought provoking. And I appreciated your approach to trying to not just hammer problems over people's heads, but actually present some ideas for solutions. Everybody's a little different on that, on like where they land on what, if they want to hear your solutions, or, how do you leave it open for going and digging and investigating? I sort of land on I don't know how much of what you guys are presenting here I fully agree with yet, but you did something awesome, which was you now made me want to go dig up data and figure things out and look at things from a systems level mindset, and then just say, yeah, what are the unintended consequences of X, Y, and Z and whatever. So I commend you for making something that's thought-provoking that way. I think that's what we're called to do, right, as storytellers and filmmakers. I think that's top-notch. So how much criticism has the film had? Have you guys bumped into anything challenging when you released it, or has it been kind of balanced, or has it been just kind of like open arms? The world has said, "Hey, we love it."
So I would say the scientific community has been very, very open arms. It's, we're getting a ton of plays at colleges, universities, a lot of different, world kind of like climate organizations and climate conventions have been really into it. In terms of a lot of the traditional media and kind of public, people definitely love to hate on it because, again, we're talking about overpopulation. So the second you bring up a word like overpopulation, all of these things come into people's minds, like China's one-child policy, the idea of coercion, the idea of like population thinning, and all of those are terrible. And if you actually watch the film, we address those, and we're like, nah, this ain't that. But
yeah, you did.
You're right. But again, the internet doesn't always watch everything and listen to everything, and everyone likes to have an opinion. So a lot of the pushback we're getting is the idea that overpopulation is the problem. A lot of people are saying that we're kind of trying to inflate an issue that isn't necessarily there, which at the end of the day, some people you just can't argue with. And then some of the other people are saying that they don't agree with our solution, like kind of like what you were saying in terms of, I don't agree with everything you're saying, but the whole point of this was, hey, you can interpret data any number of ways. If you there's the whole saying, like, if you want your data to say something, just hire a status, like a petition that can make it say it for you. So
yeah.
We just wanted to start the conversation and break through that uncomfortable barrier of like, hey, this has to be talked about. Like, we don't have to agree on it, but if we don't talk about this issue, then we're going to be in a position where we can't talk about it because we've already gone too far. But I would say in terms of the hate versus the positive, I would say it's more positive because there's so many scientists and so many different research organizations that have been screening it and that have been reaching out. We were in the One Earth Film Festival, so in terms of that, it's been a lot of good acclaim. But people,
it's never easy to take on something that could have such, I'll call it, emotional responses on both sides, and still take an honest look at it and try your best. And that's all we can do, right? Is try our best. Like even Elon Musk earlier in December was like very public in his being outspoken and saying, look, I actually think our big problem is that we're losing population. That he's describing it like an existential threat to mankind, in that, you know, now China and India are not, their numbers aren't, they're not replacing. I guess they're under the replacing numbers. So that's really interesting to me, but I don't know that it's actually an existential threat. Not that I'm an expert, but it makes me just think of different periods of time when people ramp up, population ramps up and eases back. It's like that's been clear in history, that there are times when we reproduce a lot and other times in history where we really hold back. And it's just kind of a generational thing. I don't know how much of it is cultural or what, you know, that's a fascinating study. But I don't know, like it doesn't, that's not something that's going to, you know, I don't see it as an existential threat because it's not going to change quickly, right? It's like you're talking about billions of people who, you know, within a generation could be multiplying more or less. So it just seems like it could ebb and flow. But back to the point of it's not very clear to people, and it is kind of polarized. So my hat's off to you for taking on that kind of subject. I'm curious, as when you were in your Midwest section talking about farming and the water table dropping, that was very compelling to me. And I'm just, it made me go on, like after the film was done, I jumped on Google and I'm like trying to research what the deal is with that. And I didn't really quite get the answer from the film. And it's hard for me to find answers online. Where's the water going?
So it's being pumped out. So the aquifer, like the underground aquifers, they don't necessarily fill up from top down groundwater. They're like deep sources of water that are coming up. So we're pulling all the water out and then we're spraying it on crops and using it. But then that gets washed, doesn't go back down into the aquifer. It gets washed downstream. So then you end up in, you know, all the water in the Ogallala that's under Kansas and under all these places is getting pulled up, and then it's getting washed and ending up down in the Gulf and ending up in these different places. It's not like the water is disappearing, obviously, you know, law of conservation of energy and matter.
Closed system, yeah.
But it's no longer replenishing the aquifer. And so, again...
And so the idea is that if it's in the atmosphere, it's not necessarily coming back to the crops in Kansas.
Yeah, exactly. And because of that, and one of the things that it's important to note is like, and our guy from Johns Hopkins, for some reason I can't remember his name right now, but he was the expert on population and the effect on the environment. That's kind of his whole thing. And one of the things he talks about is like, hey, we're not going to kill the planet. The planet's going to kill us. Like, if all of the water runs out in the aquifers, well, no other animal uses the aquifers except humans. So all the other animals are going to be totally fine. And then humans, our whole farming system will collapse. So it's not even necessarily about that the environment's just going to turn around and start murdering people, right? It's about the fact that our systems of infrastructure are built for a certain balance, and now that balance is changing. So if all of a sudden, you know, we say we feed the world in the Midwest, if all of a sudden the Ogallala drops and all of the farming infrastructure that's been subsidized by the government for the past 40 years all of a sudden is useless, well, now we have, on top of just the fact that we have a food crisis because we're no longer growing food, now we have a job crisis because now all the farmers can't work. And then we also have an infrastructure crisis of all of the money that was floating the farmers for so long because we knew this was coming, then the bubble pops. So it's almost like the environment is indifferent. It's just going to keep doing its thing. And we either have to adapt to it and to how we're changing it, or it's just going to wipe out the way that we know life, you know, the lifestyle that we're used to. Because at the end of the day, it's like you can get water anywhere on the planet, you can desalinify it, you can do these things, but if you have perfectly fresh, like aquifer water that you're using, that's so much easier. You know, low-hanging fruit. But then when all the low-hanging fruit's gone, and now we have to start ramping up to get the water, the side effect of that is most people won't get water. And a lot of people will start to be in that zone, in that economic zone, which we see. You know, the economy isn't exactly nice to the people at the bottom. So those are the people that are going to be the worst affected, which is really unfair in a way, because it's like the top 1% are consuming everything, and then the bottom 1% get hit with the repercussions first.
That I think that was an interesting statement. When you're in the Midwest and we jumped over to Delhi in the next segment, it, is it true that you're saying that in the film that what we do as consumers here in the West is having a major impact on the rest of the world?
So I would say yes and no. I would say it is true that what we do in the West has a major impact in the fact that we're importing everything from the rest of the world. So our consumerism is backed by the exploitation of natural resources and things in all of these other countries. So that's one kind of global supply chain thing. But also it's almost like everything it's hyper global because we're a global ecosystem, but it's also hyper local because the US directly is not affecting Delhi. But the way that the global supply chain works is forcing Delhi to do certain things, and then that hyper-local situation is affecting Delhi directly. So it's almost like, and this is why it's so hard to talk about.
I see what you're saying.
Because it's like, it's at once a global system and also a hyper-local system. And because the thing is, in India, the water tables in the aquifers under India are doing the same thing that they're doing in the Ogallala. That's not necessarily directly related, other than the fact that both of our countries are really, really heavy into farming. And then you could obviously, attach that to the global supply chain and say, why is India so heavy into farming? What are they exporting? But at a certain point, it's almost just semantics. And it makes a lot of sense to, instead of trying to go in and work out the minutia in every single little intricate part of the system, it's, change incentives to the people. And when the incentives change about what we're doing and why we're doing it, then the solutions to all these little problems will be solved because people are incentivized to solve them. Right now, we're not. I
agree with that.
It's like we're incentivized to just keep growing without thinking about how it affects the environment. If all of a sudden the global incentive changed to, all right, consumption's great. Obviously, y'all want to consume. So let's figure out a way to be sustainable in our consumption. And then there were incentives to back that. That would actually, the human ingenuity is amazing. When we're backed up against the wall, we figure shit out. That's what we do. But right now, nobody is saying our back's against the wall. Everyone's like, no, it's fine. It's totally okay. Next generation's going to feel it. And the issue, we've been saying that for 70 years. And so now it's like, at a certain point, somebody has to come out and be like, nope, our back's against the wall. We got to figure this out right now or else it's going to be no dice.
Can't keep kicking the can down the road, as they say.
I mean, you can, but, that's going to end in a very, very bad situation.
So, sort of when you landed in the solutions segment towards the end, one of the big things, like you said earlier, was education, specifically education for women. Talk to me a little bit about that. What were some of your findings? And because I'm just curious if that's what we're seeing worldwide, rather than, you gave that example in India, which I thought was great. Is that line up with everywhere else that we've seen education rise?
Yeah, and I think education is obviously a very big word. There's a lot of ways to educate people, but one of the things that we've noticed, and so a perfect example is in Nigeria, there was the average birth rate per woman was around, I think it was 7 or 8 kids per female in Nigeria, and then they did the National Population Foundation did basically a sitcom, a radio sitcom that went for a couple of years, and the main character was a woman who decided she didn't want to have kids. And she wanted to pursue a career, and she wanted to kind of become an independent woman. And by the end of that radio telenovela, they did another, census, and the average child per woman had dropped to 4. And it's
over what period of time?
I think it was over 3 or 4 years. So, and obviously, measuring statistics over that time it's a short time, but it was obvious enough where they could see at least a half drop in the amount of children being born. And a lot of that was because for the first time ever, people were being introduced to an idea that this was even possible. It's like they gotta hear that, oh wow, this character who I relate to is making decisions that I didn't realize I could be making. Or this character is giving me the courage to follow through on the decisions that I've always been wanting to be making. And so it's about letting everybody, giving everyone the option to know that this is possible. But again, that also comes with making sure that each country has the infrastructure to be able to support those things. But yeah, I mean, we've seen it in all around the world in different places when education in women goes up and healthcare for women goes up. Just naturally, statistically, population drops because women have less kids. They spend more time doing what they love. They spend more time pursuing independent careers, and they'll have 1 or 2 kids. But 1 or 2 kids per family compared to 7 or 8, that's major. in terms of the final population. But also, and this is why, again, it gets so complicated, eight children in Nigeria are consuming 1/10 of what one child in America is consuming. So that's also something that you got to kind of take into account. We're not like sitting here like blaming all of these, like third world countries saying, hey, you're having too many kids. No, it's about, hey, we want you to be able to consume more. We don't want to limit your consumption. And because of that, the only other thing that we can really talk about here is how many kids you're having. Because we want everyone to be able to come up and be able to live whatever lifestyle they want. I think it's easier to ask someone to not have a kid than it is to ask them to get rid of their stuff. Because everybody loves their stuff. And not having a kid, you're not getting rid of anything. You're actually just abstaining from a decision to do something.
Do you apply that same principled thinking, like allowing people to have the liberty to build and live the life they live, to all people, all socioeconomic statuses and all people groups across the world?
Yeah, I would say so. I think the only time it gets dangerous is when violence enters the equation. I think anybody who's nonviolent deserves to live whatever lifestyle that they want to live. And I think that can apply to every single person, but when violence starts to enter the equation, then you're all of a sudden, it's tougher to say that, because if somebody's lifestyle is, I want to create an insanely powerful terrorist organization and destroy someone, well, I don't necessarily think that that's a good lifestyle to live. But also, what's the root of that lifestyle? Is that lifestyle just happening because somebody's mad, or is it because the infrastructure in their country and that the way that they've been treated means they're not getting the resources that they deserve to be getting? So I think blanket term, yes, everyone deserves to be able to consume and live how they want. And then in the minutia, obviously, you always have edge cases and people who are the destruction they're causing is net negative on the system.
Yeah, because to say that we believe people, it's a human right to be able to, I mean, let's say, I don't know if we can take it to its logical conclusion, say it's a human right, but I tend to agree that people should have liberty, that it is a human right, that you should be able to live your life the best the way that you would like to, provided you're not hurting other people, harming other people. That's a very the philosophy there is lifting up the individual. It's building up the individual, potentially over the collective, or weighted towards the individual instead of the collective. One of the things I didn't agree with from that professor, I liked some of the statements he said. One of the things I didn't agree with was when he was like talking about, I'll just paraphrase because I'm not going to remember exactly, but he said something like, we often say to women, but aren't you going to have kids? Like, you're in your 30s, don't you want to have children? And he said, well, maybe we should flip that to where we have to sort of give a social account for, well, maybe I need to justify having a child versus not justify. Like that, to me, that kind of flies in the face of that, building up the individual, looking at the individual as having their, like, I don't know that I agree with that quite going that far in terms of social influence, in wanting to get people to have to justify whether they want to have a child or not to the rest of the world. What's your thoughts there?
I 100% would say that I agree with you on that, in terms of if you take it too far, you're just imposing another level of oppression and tyranny for the other way. It's like if you're like, hey, you have to show us a reason why you have to have kids. Well, guess what? You're limiting someone's freedom there as well. So it's kind of like, and this is also one of the assumptions that us as the crew going into the film, obviously we're talking about some dark stuff. We're talking about some crazy things about what could happen to the world. And one of the things that we kept having to remind ourselves is if freedom and that individual sovereignty is of the highest importance, we have to accept that an environmental collapse is on the table. Because if we give everybody the freedom and we give everyone the information and they still don't do anything, we can't force them to do anything. And then we're going to end up where we end up. So it's like, and this is kind of that's like the whole thing with human free will, right? It's like, yes, you have the freedom to do what you want. And that also means you have the freedom to do a lot of bad things if you want to. And who are we to step in and tell you not to do that? Obviously, governments always do that. That's the kind of their role. But I mean, my philosophy.
Sadly.
Sadly, exactly. My philosophy is that everybody, I'm not in a position to tell anybody how to live their life, and I'm not in a position to limit anybody's lifestyle. But I am in a position to be able to speak my truth and educate and do my best to hope that that works. If that doesn't work, well, is what it is kind of situation. So it's almost like
influence.
Exactly.
Like you see something, and why not explore it, right?
At the end of the day, it's like there is a line where sometimes you do have to make individual sacrifices for collective well-being. The issue is where is that line? Who enforces that line? Is it required? And I think that should probably be the conversation that everyone starts having. Not, is this happening? Is it not happening? Let's just assume it's happening and start prepping for that line and let everyone know what's going on. At least so when we get there, it's not this crazy surprise of all of a sudden, hey, all of these items are off the menu. Hey, this global supply chain isn't complete. It's like, I would rather get there with everyone being like, oh, they were right, instead of get there and being like, what the hell is going on? So I feel like that's kind of the position that we're in.
Yeah, I think when I think about sort of the individual versus the collective, those thought experiments, I often think about what it's like to be a parent, right? So I do have a lot of kids. I have 5 boys and 1 little girl, and it's awesome, and I love it. And as a parent, your liberty, you have to sacrifice what you want in order for your family to do well and to be okay and to survive and thrive and all of that, right? So yeah, absolutely, there are situations where for the collective we should sacrifice. The question, but that's like an individual choice, right? It always comes back to the individual's choice rather than it being imposed on them. That's the important distinction, I think. So my hat's off to you. Kudos. Good job. Finishing a film is not easy, and deep diving into big philosophical and systemic, system level thinking stuff is not easy. You could have driven yourself nuts for 20 years looking at different data sets and different people's opinions and whatnot. So that's not easy, but you guys jumped at it, and so my hat's off to you for that. Talking about freedom and individual sovereignty is a great segue to jump over into Web3. What attracted you to Web3? First of all, we should kind of define for people who are listening. Maybe you can help me. What is Web3?
Web3 it's the next generation of the internet. The first being connectivity, the second being social interaction and lifestyle on the internet, and now we're at a point where sovereignty and digital ownership are starting to approach. That's what Web3, in my opinion, Web3 is basically the web of sovereignty, digital ownership, and individuality, where for the first time ever we have the ability to own assets and own one-of-one value, original value in the digital sphere that's never existed before. So all of a sudden, wealth generation, intergenerational wealth, the ability to create value in the digital kind of sector is now backed by, mathematics is kind of the best way to say it, but it's basically backed by, It's not backed by a centralized entity. So it's not like the U.S. government saying, hey, U.S. dollars are valid because if you don't use them, we're going to invade your country. It's like, hey, this works because mathematically you cannot disprove it. And that all of a sudden gives people the ability to wow, now I can generate wealth in a digital form independently from any government, sovereign to myself and my value, and I can spend that on my lifestyle. That's never existed before.
Yeah.
We've never had a global currency.
Immutable is the word they use, right? Immutable. It's like it can't. This is tough for people to wrap their minds around because they're like, what are you talking about? I can go on the internet. I can do whatever I want. It's very difficult to see the power structures at play behind the scenes. And so when we talk about digital ownership and sovereignty, maybe we should just give an example of sort of the current Web 2 power structures and how it could change. Because one of the things I'm so excited and passionate about as Web 3 comes in, and I have a project we're working on here too, which I'll tell you about offline. It's not appropriate for the show because it's not ready yet, but I'm very excited to announce it someday to the world. But so we're talking about blockchain technology, right? To people, I just want people to understand the blockchain technology is it allows something that we've never really had before, which is it's a system, it's a structure that allows trustless things to happen. We don't have to worry about whether this one person who's in the middleman that can control how things should go, and that plays out all the way to even how the web is structured. Like right now, what percentage of the world's internet is served up on like AWS servers, for example, Amazon Web Services, right? That's a huge business, a huge entity that has all this power. Like, to me, I'm a capitalist, right? I love seeing businesses grow. I love seeing my own business grow. I can see the good things that are happening from that. I also think power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So when these huge entities just like they're so big and they're so full of people that have power, it's like very hard to just turn off the power. And we've seen this like with different social media giants and web technologies, and I'll go further and say pharmaceutical companies and the banks, and it's just the bigger they are, the more power they have, the more destruction they could do. And it's harder for anybody to stop that bulldozer of destruction. So to me, that's what's interesting about this Web3 thing, because it's like what it does is it's actually returning the power to the individual.
100%.
Tell me about any projects that you're working on, and what are some other examples or analogies we can give to people about Web3?
Yeah, 100%. So I'm doing a lot of stuff in the metaverse right now. So that's kind of where I think, in my direction in Web3, I think the metaverse is going to be the new social media. It's going to be kind of what takes the place of the Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and kind of moves us all into this new world. And a perfect example of Web 2 versus Web 3 in that zone. So the way that you get into digital real estate now, or this is what the metaverse is you can buy digital real estate in a metaverse. You own it. It's an NFT, and all of a sudden you own it. You have the rights to it. You can do things on it. It's now your property. For example, what Facebook is doing when they just came out and said they were going to be Meta. Obviously, I don't know if this is going to be the case, but the way that Facebook accounts have previously worked, you don't own anything. You sign up for the account, you give them rights to everything, and then they give you a service of being able to see your friends. So that's you're completely unsovereign in that situation because your access is gated by Facebook. You've agreed to their terms and conditions, and if they want to just kick you off, they can, and there's nothing that you can do to stop them. So Web3, all of a sudden now, with being able to own your digital real estate, now if Facebook comes in and was like, hey, you got to get rid of this, I could be like, nope, I don't actually, and you can't take it from me. So that ability to be able to tell a conglomerate or tell anybody, no, you can't do that, this is my land, this is my property, is kind of the beginning of Web3 and digital sovereignty in the metaverse zone. And I think that's going to be, at the end of the day, I also think that centralized entities are never going to go away. It's like we're never going to get rid of Facebook. We're never going to get rid of government. But we can severely limit their power through blockchain and through this crypto technology. When you were talking about Amazon Web Services, the reason they got so big is because when they got to a certain point, they started making deals with the government. They started getting subsidies. They started utilizing the gated system to grow to the point where you can't take their power away. So, and a lot of that's based on the fact that they're operating on the US dollar. They're backed by the dollar, which means they're backed by the United States government and the force that the United States government can wield on the rest of the world. But all of a sudden, if you use different money and you're using a different system entirely, now all of those roadblocks that are set up by the government to stop you from innovating or to stop you from moving out of your class system are just not there. So if you can generate enough value to make millions of dollars, as anybody on the planet, you can get paid millions of dollars. So all of a sudden, it's like the decision is in your hands instead of the hands of the people that are giving you access to the technology. And so in this space, in this metaverse space that I'm in now, I started a company called Box, and we're throwing metaverse festivals. So we get a ton of artists together, we get a ton of DJs together, and we throw these big festivals, get 5,000 people to show up. And, it's a lot of fun. Number one, COVID can't shut it down because it's in the metaverse, which is a big thing because now you're immune to pandemics, which is very good. But it's almost like, imagine being one of the first. This is how I describe it to people. Imagine buying land in the United States like 2 years before the Revolutionary War. Now imagine where you would be with that land 10 years after the Revolutionary War. It's like that's where we're kind of at now. Once using the metaverse is as easy as opening your iPhone, we already spend 6 hours a day on our iPhones. We're already in the metaverse per se. But once it's as easy as click a button on your glasses, and now you're like in an immersive environment, it's going to be the place that everybody goes to hang out, everybody goes to interact outside of reality. And we're seeing that reality and the real life, quote unquote, IRL, is becoming more and more limited. Like now all of a sudden with the pandemic, there's places you can't go, there's all these restrictions. So as the world gets more restricted, I think this new sovereign place of Web3 and of Metaverse is going to become the place everybody goes to get that freedom and that taste of freedom. So our intention with Box is to be, the party throwers, the Coachellas, the Lollapaloozas of this space. So in 5 years,
Gotcha.
when it's there, come to a Box party. We're gonna, create a crazy world for you to come play in. So that's kind of the angle that I'm in.
I like it, and I love that you're thinking ahead on these things. Devil's advocate. What's the dangers? And I'll preface that question by saying, I think it's coming whether we try. I think it's foolish for people to try to stop it, right? So I lean more on the along the lines of, well, how should we be an influence in terms of what's healthy and not healthy usage of it, because I think it's been that way with all of technology. It always comes with its good and its bad, right? What's some of your thoughts on what would be like? What are the dangers? What dangers do you see in terms of people spending that much time or developing this new world? Like, what's the flip side?
So, have you ever seen the movie WALL-E?
Yes,
that's the worst situation we could end up in my opinion, where all of a sudden the metaverse gets so fun and exciting that we neglect the real world, and we end up in a position where our headsets are amazing and everything else is just a trash dump, and then we end up having to leave the planet. It's like that's a real world, because at the end of the day, I feel like human beings, we work on incentives and work on priorities. If we're incentivized to stay in the metaverse because we're getting paid to stay in the metaverse, we're making all of our money in the metaverse, and IRL isn't really providing us anything other than fresh air and obviously things that are so important for humanity: fresh air, sunshine, exercise. But
food, nutrition.
Exactly. But it's like, I could definitely see a world where you're incentivized more to be in the metaverse than out, and things start to go awry and start to crumble in terms of social fabrics and things of the sort. Also on the flip side though, and one of the things, it's like, this is what I was saying about 8 billion angels and it all connecting together. We're already headed towards a place based on our current lifestyle where that's going to happen. Right? It's like we're already headed towards a place where the environment's going to get a little shaky. Things could go pretty gnarly. And one of the things that I think about a lot is, how do I say this? Also, your audio or your video just cut out. I'm not sure if it's still recording. I just wanted to say.
No, it should be.
Okay, no problem. So if you take people right now in a lot of the developed countries, and I'm assuming based on the way that things develop, people in third world countries, and as their countries develop and as they get more resources and they consume more, it's kind of going to end up in the same zone where people buy things more for social reasons and social capital than they buy it for necessity and resource. For an example, like people will buy 10 pairs of Nikes, and they buy 10 pairs of Nikes because those Nikes give them social clout when they're out, and they get value back from that, from their community. But if that's the only reason you're buying something, there's no reason to have a physical good. So in the metaverse, being able to take luxury consumption and switch it all digital, so now you have digital Nikes, you have digital clothes, you have digital hats, the amount that would alleviate pressure on the world economy in terms of resource consumption would be significant. So I see a world in which shifting social consumption into the metaverse will give us the actual resource allocation to be able to solve a lot of the problems that we're in. So I could see a world in which the metaverse actually gives us the breathing room to be able to take pressure off of IRL, solve those problems, then you end up in a balanced world where you have a sustainable lifestyle outside of the metaverse, and then you have the excitement and consumption and all those things that you want inside the metaverse. And that's one of the reasons I got so juiced up on it, is because I made a whole film about how you can't solve consumption. And all of a sudden, a year and a half later, this technology came out, and I was like, wait, you might be able to solve a lot of consumption with that. Because now, I mean, textiles are one of the most pollution-based things on the planet. Textiles are crazy. So if you take all of if everybody wears only the minimal of what they need to survive, and then in the metaverse, they have all of that clout and all of the excitement, they're not going to lose much of their lifestyle. And the net effect on that on the environment would be significant. So if we're going to have to make a lifestyle change, that feels like it might be the best one.
Do you? I don't know how why my mind goes as dystopian as it does, but do you ever think about, okay, well, could it be so stimulating? It's the Ready Player One thing. Like, it's so stimulating that people don't want to leave, and then they start to not be able to function IRL. Do you think that's a real possibility?
I do. I think all of these are real possibilities, and like you said, we're not going to stop going there. So it's like all about how to optimize our way there. And it's actually in terms of my inspiration, a big thing for me is like, I want to be in the rooms defining what these things are, because I firmly believe in human freedom. And I believe that we cannot sacrifice real life for the metaverse. It can't happen. If we do that, we're going to be dooming our civilization altogether.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
One of the reasons why I want to get into the entertainment sector of the metaverse early is to create funnels out of it, to create doors out of it that aim people back into real life and say, hey, this is actually where a lot of the value is. You need to make sure that this stays. And I think, and this is something that's a little dramatic, but I think that every big metaverse should come with a self-destruct button. And I think it should be incredibly hard to push it. But I think having that option of like, hey, if this gets crazy, we can shut it down, is really important. Even just mentally, even just having that option on the table. Because then the dystopian aspect of it feels less scary, because at least there's an off button somewhere. It's not like this machine's going to be on forever.
That's an interesting concept, because then how do you account for, like, what would be like majority rule? If 51% say, yeah, we're killing it, then it's gone. I mean, I guess everybody has that option, right, to unplug themselves. They have their personal self-destruct button. But again, like you said, if it's like crack cocaine, then people probably won't turn it off on their own. So that's, that concept of making basically a door back out, or like an outflow influence, even though you are in there and you're creating value in there, but you're still tipping people back toward the real life, is a very interesting concept. And I could see that, like with health, and where we see that now with these group workouts or exercises that people do. You're on your Peloton and you're connected to other people or whatever. So it's probably going to be the same in the metaverse. But again, that's like get back out and move your body and that kind of thinking. So I wonder what other outflow, kind of paths, directions will be in there. I hadn't really thought of that perspective. That's kind of cool. There's this company. They're a startup. I believe they're called Immersed. Have you checked them out? They're working on a more connected metaverse level way of working together, remote work. So companies can do remote work where you're all just in this virtual room together and you're like interacting. It's like you're at home, but it's like you went to the office. So I think he has, I'm forgetting his name. It's something like Renji or Benji something, but I'll look it up afterwards. But he has, I remember hearing one of his talks, and he has a similar perspective in that he's like, I just think it needs guidance, right? It's coming no matter what we do. It's more about what influence do you want to have as it comes with people. Like, we can balance it out. So that's a pretty fascinating outlook. What's your prediction in for 2022? Do you have any economic or technological predictions or anything? We're filming this right in the beginning. The New Year's has just crossed for those who are watching or listening. So I like to do these little 2022 predictions.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Let me think about that for a second. I think 2022 could go one of two different ways. And I think if the pandemic and the restrictions imposed by the pandemic by governments continues to strengthen and it continues to kind of push in the way it's going, I think we're going to end 2022 in a situation where the trust in the government and the trust in the system is so low that we may see the dollar might start to destabilize, in terms of the World Bank and the world organizations are going to start looking to the yen as a world reserve currency instead of the dollar, just because China has a lot. I mean, obviously they're authoritarian, so they can, unfortunately, but they have a lot firmer grip on their economy, and they can kind of shepherd it in a much easier way because they don't have to, they don't have as much freedom, so they don't have to get those buy checks. So I see if we keep pushing authoritarian and we keep kind of pushing in this direction, we're going to end up in a place where we're going to be actually less powerful than a lot of the other nations in the world. And in that, I think the people in the United States are going to get really, really brittle. And it's in terms of, like, I think a lot of people are going to do well. They're going to still make their money. They're going to move into these different areas. But for the people that don't have the resources to move, it's just going to get really fragile. And that could end up in a real gnarly situation. I don't know where that would go, but I could just see it, having a fragile populace with a destabilized currency is a recipe for disaster. So that's one way. I agree. I think another way is if we kind of rally and we're able to pull ourselves out of the fear of this pandemic, and we're able to kind of kickstart the inspiration in the economy and get people back into the mindset of there is a future that's bright. It's not just this brick wall in front of us. Then I think 2022 could actually be one of the biggest years for innovation in the Web3 space, and the biggest years for innovation and cultural shift towards sustainability. And I think it's just a matter of it's like what it's like playing baseball, right? What's the next pitch going to be? Because that's going to determine entirely how we hit it. If it's a curveball, we'll see. If it's a straight down the middle, we're going to absolutely crush it. But I think it's really about what's going to be thrown at us this year, because the last 2 years were brutal, and I think a lot of people made it out fine. I think a lot of people are still hurting real bad, and if we don't acknowledge that and try to move forward, we're just going to keep hurting people and keep making our economy more fragile.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you said it earlier, talking about incentives. That's one of the big things that I'm just so excited about with Web3, is that you finally have a system that's fair and that you can align incentives to personal prosperity or personal growth, or these more healthy, self-actualized processes that many people want to do, but have, because of the corruption, as you said, government and collusion, let's call it collusion between, the lobbyist culture with big companies that then get in bed with the government and get special dispensations. That the worst of all that is probably the shadow banking, and how we just debase our currency and just nobody understands it. Nobody gets it, and or they don't understand what it's doing to their life, and potentially to those who are a lot less fortunate worldwide as well. I can't quite see all the economics of that, but I know that we could have lifted more people out of poverty by now if there wasn't so much collusion, let's say. I believe that Web3 can be a huge force for good. There'll be some problems that come along with it too. There always are some things to be ironed out and figured out, but giving people their sovereignty back on all property rights and their money, I think, is just like at the top of the priority list for helping the world. So glad to hear that you are digging into that world just like I am. Listen, we're running out of time, but any final thoughts before we hang up?
Yeah, actually, just one final thought on kind of what you just said. For the first time ever in human history, at least recorded human history, we have a global currency that is untouched by any centralized power. And it's been around for 10 years, 12 years. And in a real way, it's been around since 2017. And look how much wealth has been generated in that system already. $2 trillion in a couple years in that system. To me, that just shows that when you take the middlemen out, the people know what to do. The people know how to make wealth. The people know how to work together. I mean, I'm like, for example, these festivals, I'm working with 8 different countries, and everyone's coordinating to come into the metaverse at the same time, and it's like working with someone next door to me. It's like once you take away the middlemen, the wealth increases, the value increases, the social community increases, the love increases, and people are pulled out of poverty. I mean, right now in the Philippines, the game Axie Infinity is pulling people out of poverty because they're playing to earn, and all of a sudden they're sitting there 3 weeks after they started playing with a full Ethereum, and now they can support their family for a couple months. And it's like,
that's incredible.
It's insane. And so this just shows to me that this is such a good sign that the first time ever we took pans out of the middlemen and we gave it back to the people took it and ran with it, and it's still running. And so that just gives me a lot of hope that the more the technology democratizes, the better of a chance we all have, because we're crushing it.
Yeah, this is a bigger conversation for another time, which I'd love to have with you, because this has been very stimulating. But what you just described, betting on people, describes actually the American experiment. You know, you look at world history, there was always tyranny, there was always oppression, and that's what actually drove people to come and try to settle this land. And that came with a whole bunch of problems, and the Constitution wasn't perfect, right? But one thing that it did do is it did bet on people to just run their own lives. You know, it's pretty corrupted now, and I don't want to see authoritarian government grow. I don't. I worry about people being more interested in their safety than their freedoms. But historically, you're right. When there's been times in history where the system, the societal systems, structures at play, bet on people, bet on the individual, we flourish. We flourish, right? So I'm excited to see that happen again with Web3.
Yeah, and hopefully 2022 is the year it starts to really explode.
Yeah. You know, through all the darkness and the challenges and all that, there can be amazing things that happen. So I'm optimistic. And with that, Douglas, thanks so much for being on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.